Author and journalist Nick Bryant is with us in the studio. Nick, you are Brit, you're watching this from afar. What do you make of it?
I think we're seeing why, in a very modern world, there is this fixation with a very ancient institution. We're watching the kind of majesty of the monarchy. We're watching the magic of the monarchy, and it is spellbinding. And one of the reasons why it's spellbinding is it's so staggeringly beautiful. I mean, there you have this gorgeous building, Westminster Abbey, all these military figures in their finery, you know, members of the royal family.
And of the Commonwealth.
And of the Commonwealth. It's this extraordinary coming together, isn't it, of a kind of modern world and an ancient world all in one. And it's just extraordinary to be reminded of how, you know, Britain can do this in a way that simply other countries just can't do.
And even the Queen, the unifying aspect of it being the Queen, not only has it brought her family back together, but it's brought leaders from all over the world, some who at the moment don't know how they feel about being part of the Commonwealth, and yet they're there.
Yeah, we always talk about the Queen as this figure of continuity, but she is also this figure of great transcendence. So she's this figure of transcendence in Britain. Britain's an incredibly polarised country right now. Post-Brexit, people are still working through that. You know, you've got a United Kingdom that seems to be splintering. You know, there's a big move towards independence in Scotland. Northern Ireland's now, the dominant party there is Sinn Féin, which is the political layers of the IRA. You've got a Commonwealth where, since her death, prime ministers have spoken openly about, you know, getting rid of the monarchy as their head of state. And yet, in this moment, everybody's coming together.
So the political dimensions of what you're talking about are fascinating. We might talk about it later in the show. We were looking at, you know, the little symbols on uniforms and things like that that tell all these tales that perhaps the less discerning eye can't spot. You're a more discerning eye. Is there anything that's caught your eye?
Well, the reason that Harry isn't wearing a uniform and the reason that Prince Andrew isn't wearing a uniform are because they're no longer working royals. So that's a kind of protocol thing. Obviously, there's a very large shadow over Prince Andrew at the moment because of his relationship with a convicted paedophile, the late Jeffrey Epstein, and the fact that there are allegations against him, which he denies, of rape and sexual assault. Now, Harry's situation is obviously very different. He has moved to California.
What do you think for the British
wife, Meghan?
public? How do you think they feel about Harry and Meghan now? They've seen them come back into the fold, do their duty, do what has been asked of them. Do they get any slack cut now, or is it a case of once they go back there, though, it's business as usual for the tabloids and for the British people?
The Brits love a happy ending. The Brits love a fairy tale happy ending. And I think that a lot of people just love seeing the family back together, the two brothers walking side by side. You know, a lot of royal correspondents have sort of remodeled themselves as mind readers, I think, and have read into these acts, everything's okay again. Now, we just don't know what is happening, but that is what people want to believe. And I think that's the key thing. Now, how it goes on from here, well, we'll probably be finding out maybe some of the stuff that did happen behind the scenes. We just simply don't know. But I think a lot of people have loved seeing this coming together. And even in the funeral, we're watching for those little bits of body language, aren't we? We're looking at those gestures. You know, in the midst of this sacred and solemn service, you know, there's still an element of soap opera.
But for all the public dimension to this and the formal bit of this, it is a family that is in mourning.
Yeah. And in a way, it's a shame that the mourning has had to unfold in such a full glare, and it's good that they're going to have this moment later where they can gather.
That moment? What happened?
Well, they can gather in private later on this evening. Obviously, there's the funeral at Westminster Abbey. Then there's a committal service, which again will be televised at Windsor Castle in St George's Chapel there, and then there'll be a private service. And I think at the very end, when the Queen's casket actually gets sealed in the royal vault, then you're down to her 4 kids. It's just them and the body of their mother, and that is the moment of privacy. But you know, what a tough thing to do, to conduct your mourning
It's such a public way.
in the full glare of the world's media.
But it's a tough thing to have a job like that, isn't it? That is all about that. I mean,
think
everything
about how
you
we
do
analysed Charles and the pen during the week, and that,
Yeah.
you know, this is a person under immense stress, not only, you know, like the loss, but also this new reign and all of that. And here we are going, well, he's had a hissy about a pen. Like,
Yeah.
you know, the glare is so strong.
Yeah, and often they talk about the monarchy as a gilded cage, and
It's very gilded. I mean, it is
Very
a very
gilded.
gilded cage.
very gilded. But there is this sense that it's hard to break free. And I mean, maybe, you know, Harry and Meghan, I mean, they've looked to the west coast of America almost as a place of not just exile, but liberation. And I think a lot of people are often, you know, quite glad to sort of break free of that. But it's so fascinating to watch this because a lot of the emotions that we've seen over the last 10 days, in this service, they're quite contained, aren't they? It's sort of, the emotions are under control when so many of the emotions of the past 10 days have really come to the surface in Britain. There's this amazing poll. 44% of the country have cried or welled up in response to the Queen's death. A country that used to be famed for its emotional reticence really defines itself now with these very public outpourings of grief and emotion.
Nick, you covered the funeral of Princess Diana, and you said about that time there was just something about seeing the coffin that made it very real. For you now, with all of us seeing this coffin here, what do you...
Yeah, it's so fascinating. I know we've got a new monarch in Britain, King Charles III, but these really do feel like the dying moments of the Elizabethan age. You know, we are in the Carolean age already. Whether it'll be an age or not, or an era, that remains to be seen. But what we're watching here does feel very final, doesn't it? This is the end of the era, the age of Elizabeth. And I think tomorrow, Britain's going to wake up with a very big emotional hangover.
It has come together in quite an extraordinary fashion. I watched an interview with Jacinda Ardern, the New Zealand Prime Minister, in London, saying she was asked to respond to the pageantry and what it meant for her being there, but her observation was actually about the way ordinary Brits had come out onto the streets. And that is something that is, I suppose, a bit of a surprise.
Yeah, Britain really puts on some pretty genre-busting content and programming at these phases because you see this solemn ritual, this solemn ceremonial, but then you see the queue. You know, the queue has been like this reality TV show for the past 4 or 5 days. You know, there's been...
There's Beckham going along.
There's
together,
David
you know,
Beckham. There's people who are kind of meeting and deciding they're going to watch the funeral together. You know, it's kind of a little bit of blind date thrown in. You know, it's all this stuff that is just brought together in this moment that shows, you know, many of the contradictions in Britain, but it also shows the figure that sort of transcends those contradictions. And that, for much of her reign, has been Queen Elizabeth.
Thanks, Nick.